I suppose we all hope that COVID is definitely on its way out, so this will be the last Zoom event. Anyhow, we managed to get this evening together. This evening is organized by ACE, and ACE is a small think tank on the cutting edge of journalism, design, data, and cultural philosophy. And as ACE, we coined the term Designalism. And in the coming 1.5 hours or so, we hope to explain to you, to give you some insight into what Designalism is. There is even a website, which I will remind you of later. The website is called designalism.nl. Designalism, what is it? We use the term designalism for newsy, newsworthy works that combine design and journalism. Some people call it fact-driven art. Some other people call it artistic journalism. We chose designalism. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a pandemic. Let's call it COVID-19. And people are scared, people fall ill, people die. And health workers are working hard in overcrowded hospitals. Now the question is, how much do health workers earn? And how much do they earn if you compare it to others in society? And let's go up to, say, the CEO of KLM or the CEO of Booking. This question is something that was exactly visualized by Dutch artist Yuri Veerman. And just to give you an insight in what we're going to talk about later, and there will be lots of stuff to see and to enjoy, but just to give you a small insight in what the idea is of fact-driven aesthetics or art, is this little clip made by Yuri Veerman.
Hoeveel geld verdient een held? Iemand die de boel laat draaien. Hoeveel verdient zo iemand? Iemand die je veiligheid geeft. Hoeveel geef je daarvoor terug? Iemand die je kinderen leert schrijven. Wat voor salaris hoort daarbij? Modaal. Bovenmodaal. Een ton. Iemand die aan het roer staat. Iemand die je hart laat kloppen. Iemand die je leven redt. Hoeveel verdient zo iemand?
So here's the health worker, there's the CEO of KLM. That's the difference in our society. Okay, more examples, as I said, to follow. I'm joined now by Simone Weimans. Welcome, Simone.
Welcome.
I would say Simone is a classic newsreader and presenter for Dutch public television and radio. This very short visualization you saw by Yuri Veerman, is that something you would expect or could expect in the 8 o'clock news?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a department called the Paint Box. It's a bit of an old name, but it's still called the Paint Box, and they do all the graphics for the news, and they're really trying to use new technologies and new ways of telling the stories graphically. So I definitely think maybe not literally this one, because the XS and the YS are not really completely right, but definitely they're experimenting with new ways of telling stories graphically in the news.
Okay.
Yeah.
You work for Dutch public broadcasting,
Right.
And you are a fighter for the public cause. Why? What is the importance
Well,
of...
I mean, as a journalist, you are one of the guardians of democracy. It sounds a bit like big, but I always think about myself, am I really a guardian, you know? But yeah, I really feel that as journalists, we are guardians and pillars of democracy. We really have to make sure that we give the right information, that we ask critical questions to political leaders, CEOs, regular people in the streets, and also give information so that people make informed decisions, put stories into context, so make the news ourselves, do our own research, tell news stories. So I think it's really important to fight for that cause, definitely. Yeah.
Journalism is under fire a lot these days. What is the danger in that? There are a lot of right-wing politicians, extreme right-wing politicians that say journalists are scum, people who don't like news items that don't coincide with their opinions, they will put it in the trash bin. What is the danger of that?
I think the danger of all this misinformation and attacks on media is that, like we said, we are guardians of democracy. And when people don't believe us anymore or attack us, because that's what's happening, there was on the news, I think yesterday or the day before, that 8 in 10 journalists in the past year have been threatened physically through social media or through other means. And it's really dangerous because we can't make those important stories anymore, or we feel less inclined to go to a large demonstration. For instance, at the NOS, we used to have big stickers on our satellite cars. They were taken away because when our reporters...
The stickers, you mean, were taken?
Stickers, so you can't see that it's NOS. It's just a random white van, but it's a satellite van. And they were taken off because when the reporters went to big demonstrations, for instance, COVID demonstrations, they were attacked by the people there. So and also on the road, people were trying to drive them off the road. So it's really dangerous when you start talking about journalists as attackers of the country, or I think it's really dangerous for democracy. And yeah, we really have to fight. That's how I feel. It feels a bit strange that 2021 we have to really fight for our cause, for our job, for democracy. And that's also one of the reasons that we're here, to tell news stories and really try to get the audience to watch our output.
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, with some exaggeration, you could say that as a classic news reader, as you are, one of the things you're doing, you're somewhat like maybe the city announcer in the Middle Ages, having the loudest voice because you have the media, and you have the news.
Yeah. Well, if you say we have the media, I think those days are long gone because there's so many other ways.
Well, you have
that
the voice, you have the news.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And you have the voice. I mean, television and radio is still a loud voice.
It's a very loud voice. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But is that way of divulging news to the public, to the audience?
Yeah.
Is that still the right way to convey news, or
I don't think there's a right way anymore. It's so much diversified. Also, when you see what we do at the NOS, it's not just me standing there reading the news. We have podcasts. We have on social media. A lot of young people follow us through YouTube, and we have a young people department, as I call it, as an old woman. But so there's so many ways that we're talking to our audience, not just the 8 o'clock news, pom pom, and then you start speaking. There's a lot of different pathways that you can tell the story, and we are very aware of that. That's very important. That it's not only the newsreader, the classical voice, but it's a completely different voice. Also, small voices. You make small podcasts as well. So I think it's. I think this form of the 8 o'clock news and this really classical form of journalism will always stay. We saw the last year our viewership really went up because when there's a big crisis, I feel that people need, to find their way through all this misinformation. Yeah. And they know that we really abide by the rules. We take our work very seriously. We really want to speak about the facts and contextualize our story. So people really value that. So I feel that as long as people value what we do and we diversify and really try to reach new audiences, I think the newsreader will stay. Maybe not in a physical form. It could be a robot, or it could be an avatar, whatever. That would be very interesting to speak about what it would look like physically. Mm-hmm. But no, I think what we do is still important.
Okay. Are you satisfied with the current state of journalism, or do you think more innovation is needed, or would you like to see new forms of storytelling?
No, I really love new forms of storytelling. When I'm on Twitter and I see sometimes New York Times, they do like animations, or what Bellingcat does, and how they try to work with the classical media organizations to incorporate these new techniques. No, I really think that's a very important development. Very important. And that's why I think this. I didn't know about Designalism. I didn't know it was it had a name, or artistic journalism, but I think it's really exciting to see what's possible, definitely.
Okay, now at the end of this evening you will come back, so I hope you enjoy what you're going to see in the meantime. Thank you, Simone.
Okay,
till later. First, I would like to take a look at the way academia looks at journalistic information. And this is Stijn Postema. Stijn Postema is a journalist with a background in visual culture, and currently he's working on his PhD exploring the field of designalism, and he calls it artistic journalism. Stijn, welcome. What is your PhD about, actually?
Well, you said it. My PhD is about artistic journalism, which basically is the confluence of arts and journalism, the interdisciplinary collaboration of those who work in the arts and those who work in journalism, or those who do both, which is what we also see.
And is that field rich and broad enough to work on a PhD?
Well, at first I didn't know if there was anything going on between journalism and arts. That was a few years ago. But I have a background in journalism as a freelance journalist, and I love to work in visual arts. So I started exploring this, and I found out that there's actually a lot. And historically, both are really intertwined. So you said it in the Middle Ages, you had the village announcer who was actually a theater player.
He was an actor.
A performer, indeed. So, and nowadays, if you look at the news anchor, in a way, this is also a performer. But the style, the aesthetic style that you see the news anchor use is that of is a plain style. It's a kind of an objective form that gives us the impression that what she says or he says is objective in nature.
Okay. There are many names given to this crossover. We call it designalism, you call it artistic journalism. As I said, fact-driven aesthetics is being used. Why did you choose the term artistic journalism?
Yeah, don't look too much behind it. It's about art, it's about journalism. I could have used the term journalistic art because both the terms are in there as well. That term was coined already, so to say, by someone who was studying the field of arts and looked at how journalistic methods were used in this. Alfredo Camarotti is his name. And I thought, okay, I want to be looking at news work especially, and how every form of journalism is actually also art, a piece of art in a way.
In what way?
It can be evaluated in form, as I just said, in aesthetic form, for example.
Like an artwork?
Yes, but you can also look at the practices that they have very much similarities. We are talking about craftsmanship, so we are talking about creators. And in academia, what we see is that many of our students, they do journalism, they start with the journalism education because they want to create something beautiful. So that's how it starts.
Yeah.
And then we have to learn them how to do this, but also to think about presenting facts, think about doing right in this world, and bring them in contact with journalism ideology, so to say.
I see. Could you say what is the importance of your research? I mean, apart from the fact that you won the title and you can have your PhD, but what is the...
Yeah, that's titles are not important at all, no. Journalism at the moment faces quite some challenges, and many academics have done the research in this. It's a precarious occupation. There's a lot of...
Yeah.
Yes, precarious. There's a lot of uncertainty, job insecurity. It's a lot of times it's project-based, short-term, and technology created a situation in which there's a lot of people who also present themselves as journalists. So, journalism is in constant change, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That constant change means that innovation is necessary and creativity is necessary. So it makes a lot of sense to look at the arts for this, because they know how to be creative.
I see.
And at the same time, another thing that you see, there's more interdisciplinary collaboration. So that means that the vocabulary that both disciplines are using, that you have to find out and talk to each other. What do you mean? If you talk about truth, do we mean the same thing? You can mean a factual truth, but for an artist it can mean a meaningful truth, so to say.
Or an emotional truth.
Or an emotional truth, exactly. And that is something very interesting, because academics, they see that journalism is slowly making a kind of an emotional turn. And there's a strong focus at the moment on what is this effective emotional turn in journalism mean for the profession.
Okay. We will go first, we will continue our conversation, but the person I'm going to introduce is staying actually far away from the emotional interpretation, I would say. We're going to watch a pre-recorded interview with someone who started to revolutionize journalism 7 years ago. Eliot Higgins started Bellingcat in 2014. It is an investigative website that uses open source tools to expose the truth behind global news stories. And Bellingcat really has given a boost to citizen journalism, something that Stein mentioned already. More people are doing journalistic work. We can easily do it with our phones. We can do it from behind our computer. This is something that Eliot Higgins tapped into when he started Bellingcat. The results of Bellingcat are stunning, are really stunning. If you think of war crimes in Syria, if you think of the poisoning of Skripal, of Navalny, they found out who the perpetrators were. If you think of the downing of the plane over Ukraine, MH17, they found names, surnames, telephone numbers of the perpetrators. You could say Bellingcat has changed research methods and investigative journalism forever. My first question to Eliot was how he started.
Well, I'd spent about 2 years blogging, and during those 2 years, I'd seen online open source investigation grow as a movement from, just a kind of group of kind of amateurs figuring this stuff out to something that was getting more and more recognized. So I wanted to create a space where people could kind of submit their own open source investigations for publication and also learn how to do open source investigations themselves. So it started off with those very basic ideas, and it's kind of grown ever since then.
Could you indicate some of the projects you're most proud of?
Well, I think, of course, MH17 was, one of the first big Bellingcat investigations, and I think that was important both for Bellingcat and also online open source investigation as a kind of entire field, because I think it brought that to such a broad range of people and demonstrated to people that there's, value in this kind of material, and you can learn out a huge amount of information and also counter kind of disinformation and lies that come from other sources. I think as well, the work we've done on the kind of Russian assassination stuff as well, starting with the Skripal investigation and everything that's involved, kind of unfolded since then, like the discovery of the nerve agent factory in Russia, the Navalny poisoning investigation we did, and these further assassinations that we keep uncovering. Really, that's just been one ongoing investigation, but we've covered an incredible amount, and I think it's had real impact in the world.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was thinking, when you do this kind of research and you find the things that Bellingcat is finding, would you say that on a personal level, it's kind of frustrating that you kind of present the results and then basically nothing changes?
It can be to a certain extent, but you also understand that in certain situations it will take a long time for there to be accountability. I mean, you look at the conflict in Syria that's in its 10th year now,
Yeah.
and it's only just starting to see cases in Germany and France that's prosecuting suspects for these chemical weapon attacks that occurred. On the other hand, sometimes you can have results in a lot more quickly. We did an investigation into a video that was shared on social media showing two women and two young children somewhere in Africa being executed by soldiers at a roadside, and by coming together and working with a kind of a community of people to investigate that, after a year those soldiers were convicted for those murders, and that was the direct response to the investigation that we did. So even though sometimes things can seem like they take a long time to change, sometimes they can be surprisingly rapid.
If you look at the way you do your research, in what kind of ways does what Bellingcat does differ from, let's say, traditional news media?
I mean, I think for one thing, we're very, one of the first organizations to kind of understand the value of, basically user-generated content and how that could be combined with these kind of new sources of information like, Google Maps and Google Street View to, verify events and have this kind of view from a long distance that's actually verifiable. I think as well, unusually, our audience isn't just kind of consumers of the information that we're producing, but sometimes participants in the investigations themselves. And we use that wherever possible. And when you're kind of dealing with, say, a traditional investigative organization, be they working on justice and accountability or journalism, they tend to keep stuff to themselves, while we kind of try and draw in as many people as possible to look at the things that we're looking at. And I think that gives us a certain kind of edge over other organizations working on investigative work.
What do you think traditional news media can learn from the Bellingcat approach in finding information or making stories?
Well, I think there's certainly a value there. And I think the issue a lot of traditional media has is unless you're quite a large organization, you can dedicate kind of serious resources to kind of setting up an open source, investigation unit. It can be quite difficult to do. So the news organizations that have been successful doing this, so organizations like the BBC and the New York Times, who have set up teams who are able to, have the budget and the resources and the staff power to actually dedicate their time to it. Doing it as giving it to a journalist as a job to do on their normal day-to-day work means that they aren't going to have time to do the open source investigation, because you have to be engaged with that constantly, because it's constantly changing. There's new information coming out at the time. You have to be someone who consumes a lot of kind of user-generated content, so you can see when stuff is happening and where the interesting kind of stories and potential kind of areas of analysis are emerging from. So with smaller news organizations, what we try and do is team up with them whenever possible and kind of use our open source investigation expertise in combination with their reporting methods. And we found that to be extremely effective on a number of different topics.
And if you would speculate, where do you think our journalism is heading for? If you would say in a period of 5 years, 10 years, will we still have... Would Bellingcat be still on the sideline providing information occasionally, or do you think journalism in itself is changing?
I don't think it's going to change so dramatically that it'll be unrecognizable. I expect there'll be more and more organizations who do kind of adopt open source information in their own investigative work and have a growing understanding of how to do that. I mean, keeping in mind that even a few years ago, it was really just a small number of kind of journalism courses who were teaching about online open source investigation. Yeah. So those are now students who are actually coming into the workforce and becoming part of these organizations. A lot of the kind of early development of this in news organizations was led by taking advantage of the work of kind of amateurs more than kind of anything that was coming from those news organizations. So I think that's going to be one shift. I mean, in Bellingcat's own work, I mean, we're moving now into kind of creating kind of media productions, so documentaries and things like that, to take the very complicated investigations we've done, but present them in the way that's kind of easier for the audience to understand, while still retaining that kind of very high quality. So with the way in which kind of documentary film has been so popular thanks to the streaming services putting money into a whole range of documentaries. I think that might be a new way to kind of present journalism in a way that's kind of engaging to a broader audience. And for Bellingcat, looking at different ways to engage with audiences is very important, because as I said before, our audiences aren't just receiving the information we're putting out, but often part of that. So the bigger audience we have, the more chance there is for us to collaborate with our audience in that way.
And in what way do you think, let's say, artists or designers could use the knowledge and the tools and the technologies that Bellingcat is using?
Well, I've been interested in the work of forensic architecture at Goldsmiths University, because they usually take a very visual approach to the way they kind of present this information. And I think we shouldn't be afraid when we're doing investigative work to look at ways of engaging with audiences in different ways, and different kinds of audiences, because people consume information in a whole range of different ways now, from kind of more obvious stuff like, reading Twitter and, visiting websites and watching TV programs, ways that, we might not think about, ways that kind of can be engaging for an audience that we might not necessarily engage with a lot ourselves. So if someone, is artistic and they can, look at the work that Bellingcat does and think how, they could translate that in a different way, how they can present that in a different way, how they can, reach their audience in a way that kind of they know will work, then that's, something that I think is to be encouraged as much as possible.
Because would you say that that is one of the main differences between Bellingcat and forensic architecture, the kind of visual approach? Because in content, basically, what you're doing is pretty much the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've collaborated quite a bit with forensic architecture on investigations, where we've kind of provided the kind of video footage and the analysis, and then they've been able to build models and, environments around that's made them kind of easy to explore and understand. Because often we're dealing with information that's very fragmented. You might have videos and photographs from an airstrike, but there'll be like a dozen videos and photographs from multiple sources from different angles. And we're trying in a way to defragment that, to actually say this is part of one moment, not 12 separate things. And by working with the likes of forensic architecture, who can then take that and turn that into, make it part of a three-dimensional model that allows you to explore that and do that in a whole range of different ways, it makes it a lot more accessible to audiences who I think would otherwise, be put off by the kind of lengthy kind of posts that we put out on Bellingcat.
Don't worry, Eliot mentioned forensic architecture. We will see much more about what they're doing later on. Stijn, is this approach, Bellingcat, is that the type of artistic journalism, designalism that we're looking for?
Okay, good question. Well, I think this is a very, very interesting start of this event tonight. As you progress through all these kinds of forms of arts and journalism, that there's a kind of a collaboration. And I think what you see here with the Bellingcat work is that journalism is actually open towards change, because Bellingcat is really respected in the Western journalism world especially. They have given a lot of workshops, they are teaching and they are learning journalists how to use open sources. So they collaborate with a lot of media. So what this shows is that journalism is willing to change, and it's not as fixated on remaining the way it is.
Do you think traditional media should embrace their approach more? And what is the problem? Because
yes, well, it's just the way they work it's very interesting. In academia, academics always like to see large movements, and in this case, you would be talking about a mechanical turn in journalism, in which data journalism becomes more and more important. If you go through the evening, you will see more effective forms of journalism. One of the examples is Teatro di Nascosto, which is a form of journalistic theater. And what you see there is, I'm doing a case study on this right now, so I'm very enthusiastic about it. And what you see there is that they dissolve in a society for a longer time to learn not only how people experience the news events, and we're talking about conflict zone situations here, but also they're learning the body language. They are really understanding the meaning of what it is to be in such a situation. Now, recently we have only seen this kind of journalism in the documentary For Sama and such kind of projects. But well, I think journalism has a lot to learn in delving deeper, going into more embedded situations, and it takes longer, it takes more time, but it also will learn journalism to look at, for example, conflict situations in a different way. So this is just one of the aspects that journalism can work with art.
Okay, thank you, Stijn. We will go on here to the next step in our story. Another journalistic medium that aims to innovate journalism is the Dutch platform The Correspondent. They tried in America as well as The Correspondent. It started in 2013, just 1 year before Bellingcat. And interestingly, The Correspondent is the brainchild of a journalist, Rob Wijnberg, and a designer, Harald Dunnink. Harald Dunnink is also the founder of design agency Momkai. In this pre-recorded interview, Harald tells us all about The Correspondent and how they started and why.
Harald, what is The Correspondent and why did you start it?
The Correspondent is an online journalism platform for unbreaking news. So to get beyond the daily news grind and understand really how the world works. I'm involved as the creative director, co-founder, to help it start and to help give it a head start in online. So my background is really as a digital designer. I'm the founder of Momkai, a creative agency in Amsterdam, and we really help to get projects from 0 to 1. So to help, give birth to an idea.
And what was your interest as a designer in journalism?
So my interest into journalism was always as a reader. I wasn't involved, before The Correspondent, I wasn't involved in journalistic projects. And I met Rob Wijnberg, the founder of The Correspondent, who was previously at a large newspaper, was fired for having to, in my opinion, more progressive ideas on where journalism should go. So he had very innovative ideas. And I think the role of a designer is really to help shape ideas, help shape the environment. And hearing him talk really triggered with me both as a designer, thinking one of these ideas, I think that creating the right environment, creating the right brand, really creating holistically can really help get this idea into a fruitful enterprise. And on the other hand, as a consumer of news, I was fed up with how online the idea was often, we go back in time, this is 2012, 2013 that we started it. The idea was really that news should be quick, should be, people don't read online, they are ignorant fools that are not interested in the world, which is of course a really weird idea. So we thought, if to do this differently, we have to create something that is not so dependent on ads, so it's completely ad-free, which as a designer is also very pleasant because it's a much more fun experience to watch, and that we really build it from the ground on up, and that
together with Rob.
Yeah.
So the journalist and the designer.
Exactly.
What was the extra, do you think, of that collaboration?
Well, first and foremost, I think in any kind of project that you start, it's the people. So people believing in an idea and people seeing the potential of an idea. So really, how do you get to that from 0 to 1? And someone like Rob is a philosopher. He had a really a great feeling of what was happening at the time and how you can create something different, a different kind of news story. And the difference, I think, for The Correspondent is really that it's not only behind the scenes, but also the concept itself is really focused on people. Where before the journalist was asked to to cover any kind of subject. Here, the premise is that a correspondent has her or his obsession, something that they really care about, like economics or healthcare or forgotten wars, and that you give that person all the freedom to create the stories that they think is important. And what we ask of them is to share their learning curve. And I think the big difference for a lot of journalists that started at the Correspondent is that you have a very different relationship with your audience. So we see our audience as an untapped source of knowledge and really try to get the best out of them and see them as experts. So one correspondent healthcare knows way less than 300 doctors on the platform.
So that it's also the interaction with the audience.
Yeah, I think very much so. The community is very important. With Momkai, the kind of projects that we design, we learned through collaborating with New York University and Professor Jay Rosen, who was also involved later at the Correspondent, and we had contact with him also before we started the crowdfunding. He was really inspirational to us on what he called in an essay the people formerly known as the audience. This different kind of interaction, this untapped source of knowledge. And with Momkai we started to design in that kind of frame, which we over time learned more about, together with NYU, to call it memberful. So how can we create a meaningful membership experience?
Now you're 8 years on. Are you satisfied?
8 years, if you say it like it's. I think there's always room for improvement. There are always things that you can do.
Where is there room for improvement?
So always behind the scenes, you can be more structured, be more healthy. Before what the consumer sees, you can do more with video. You can be more on point on social. So, but something like video, certain routes of video can be really expensive. Other routes you really have to own, do it right, or rather not do it. We are doing a lot of exploration there, or the team at the Correspondent, the journalists are doing a lot of exploration with audio. Just built a audio recording studio. So here we are at Momkai, my design agency, but the Correspondent is downstairs on the first floor, and there we have now an audio recording studio. So to give more freedom to the journalists and also see that there's potential in the story on different levels. So you can tell the story really shortly in a video, you can do a podcast about it, you can do a long essay about it, and those things are not exclusive to each other. So to really grasp that potential. And sometimes you also have to share or tell a journalist, it's not a bad thing to repeat the insight that you had, because those are different audiences that you cater to.
Harald Dunnink, as you noticed, up till now we stayed fairly close to journalism as we know it, but there is much more. I'm joined now by Angelique Spaninks. Welcome.
Hello.
Angelique is director of MU, hybrid art house in the Dutch city of Eindhoven, and she has a background in both art and journalism.
Yes.
Angelique, does it surprise you that Harald Dunnink, as a designer, got involved in journalism?
No, not at all.
Not
really?
at all?
No. I think design has evolved many years ago already beyond the product and the material design, adding new fields like information design, like social design, more conceptual ideas of how to shape our world and our information society, and also do a lot of research. And I think that's one of the common grounds where journalism and design meet, is in the research field. And that is very much also my interest in how design is working.
Is it solely the research, or could you say that are there other things you can think about why design is important to innovate journalism, and vice versa? What could designers
Yeah, it goes
learn
both
from?
ways, I think. I think journalism is evolving very strongly too, but within its own maybe limitations or its own formats, the way technology is evolving and how to use these information technologies. I think media are using that in a certain way that fits the way media work. And I think design has the much more liberty to take the same type of technologies and experiment a lot more with it, use it in a different way, not focus on the now, but add loads and loads of questions to something specific, which can be a news fact, but it can also be a human story or a line of thought or a different take on history or the future. And design has all this liberty and all this possibility to also add imagination, to also add design strategies, design ways of thinking, taking things apart and reconstructing it, that I don't think are easy to implement in common journalism. So I think design can be a bit of the testing ground and the playing fields, but also the critical side to how media are working, questioning that also. And I think a lot of designers are taking up that possibility.
You created the show called the New Newsroom 3 years ago. What was that about?
That was very much about the idea that we are so submerged in numerous ways to generate and share information and stories and news. We live in this information society, and how do we deal with that? And it's literally at our fingertips. We can do it all with our little machine that's everywhere. And how can we how can we use this power of digital technology and big data and artificial intelligence and social media and create new and interesting and different, maybe also like civic journalism, as everybody can do it? That doesn't mean we are all journalists, but we potentially could be. And I think that Bellingcat is proving that, and forensic journalism is proving that architects can be great fact-checkers and researchers. So I think all these different players in this field of the information society are adding to bring it further, to innovate collectively.
Okay, we come back to this. I suggest we start to watch first a pre-recorded interview, because this person that you're going to see, she is a pioneer in the kind of work that Angelique is talking about. Her name is Mazria Katz, and she's based in New York as a journalist and a writer, and she was director at Eyebeam Center for the Future of Journalism, supporting artists to produce innovative journalistic work. Marisa is in New York. I would love to be there too, but Corona, as we said. So there is a pre-recorded interview in which she shows an example of a project that she was proud of and involved with that was prize-winning. And I started to ask her what she's working on right now.
Well, I'm back to reporting almost full time, actually. So I just wrapped a piece for the New York Times a couple weeks ago. I'm working on a few more right now, basically still focusing on the same beat that I've been focusing on for years, which is sort of that place where culture and politics kind of meet, which is basically everything these days. So it's not really, as abstract as it used to be, I guess, maybe when I started.
And now in the work you're doing and the work you have been doing, you seem to be specifically keen on the let's say, the cutting edge of art and journalism. And why is that?
I really feel that art can explore abstract truths, and when it's paired with rigorous journalism, I think readers are able to understand a story in a way that's closer to how they experience the world itself. And that's very important because I think the way that news has been produced and is being experienced has in some way it's been kind of convulsing a little bit. It's kind of going through a very it's reinventing itself, but yet I do feel that art has a way of upending the way we typically see issues that affect our daily lives that is needed in journalism.
Can you give me an example?
Right. So one of the pieces that just was debuted on the Eyebeam Center for the Future of Journalism, which basically means, when I say debuted, it means it was supported by the center, was a piece that worked with an artist named Matt Hein and a journalist named Ben Mock for the New Yorker. And this was like the most ambitious, let's say, innovative sort of online experiential piece that the New Yorker has ever done. Essentially what it is that Ben Mock is this unbelievable journalist who spent time reporting on people who have or were interned in the camps in Xinjiang. And what he basically did, and the piece was called sort of Inside Xinjiang's Prison State. The piece was accompanied by an immersive virtual reality documentary called Re-Educated, which also premiered at South by Southwest and has went on to win quite a number of awards, actually. And basically what it does is the article in the film examines the secret world of re-education camps in Xinjiang, in the region of China. And it's a site that's believed to have sort of the largest mass internment of ethnic and religious minorities since World War II. And in 2018, a year after the camps began to sort of crop up in the region, it was reported that as many as 1 million Chinese people, predominantly Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities, were held in captivity. And so for this article, basically the artist, Matt, worked with Ben to tell the stories of 3 men that were imprisoned in a camp in the city of Tachang.
If you stand in the center of the room, facing the door, you see a small, eye-shaped camera.
Behind you is another camera. Then here is a toilet. The beds were bunk beds. Here's a bed where I slept. I slept on the upper bunk.
If you look out the window, you can see the huge fence of the camp and a grassy area.
What's so fascinating about this is that nobody's actually able to go inside these camps, right? This is kind of one of those examples of it's ambiguous. It's kind of, we don't really know exactly. Maybe there are a couple images online, but the story itself is sort of still relatively obscured from the public. And so what this story did, and what Matt's work did in particular, was like, it illustrated a very complex story that otherwise, you might read and you might not quite understand, or it might not, like, if you were to just read it, you might not really understand the sort of the depth to which this program is being sort of enacted in China.
And
right?
now, as a user, you become part of it. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Almost as if you are there.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
When you think of a project like this, what does it show to traditional media? What can they learn from it?
It shows to me, right, is that the potential impact that art can have on the world of journalism, right? That like the two can work in a way that supports the other, and they aren't, in the way that traditionally you see art as a kind of illustrative afterthought, write with stories. But here, it actually worked to tell the story. And I think that with so many complex stories that are being told these days, I think it does help. I think it helps just sort of um, make the complicated more clear. And I think that's what this shows. And I think it shows it very, very effectively. And I think it demonstrates how it can be used again and again, this kind of method, this collaborative method.
Where do you think this crossover approach is leading?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into this boring subject, but you know, the economics of it is where this could potentially prevent it from being more mainstream. They're not, it's not inexpensive to produce these kinds of revelatory journalistic pieces.
Right.
You know, if I had it my way, I would say, can everybody just slow down and maybe not produce as much, but a little bit more concentrated and a little bit more ambitious? But, you know, the internet doesn't really survive or function in that way. And so we're in a bit of a, it's a bit of a conundrum, right? But that is, I think there are great examples of where this can go and the impact it can have. But the important thing at the moment is like trying to figure out a way to reconfigure the economies or the sort of budgets of, you know, publications so that they enable more ambitious, rigorous storytelling that does take more time, right? And time, we're often journalists, editors, publishers are time poor. How do we change that? I don't know. That's something I'm very interested in pursuing. And that's the thing that I really think about a lot with all of these projects of mine.
Marisa Katz from New York. Angelique, is this examples that she showed, is that what we have to think about when we talk about designalism, merging design and journalism?
Yes, certainly. It's I think, a good example. It underlines the visual culture that we're in. They are taking you inside a world where you yourself never can be in or never want to be in. Maybe that is also a problematic thing a little bit, because as Western news consumers, we are getting our peek into these camps that are also part due to how we treat the world. I mean, it's that's a problematic side to it. But I do think it's important to have that. But
that's in the story. That's not.
Yeah, that's in the story. Yeah, but that's also by illustrating it. It's also like having a VR and going into a Syrian camp. And then walking around in a camp like that. Is that where we want to go? Is that what news is?
Is that morally acceptable?
Yes, that's another debate maybe, mm-hmm. But that's also what is happening, of course, with these new technologies that you can use in very different ways. I think it's something to address, and I'm sure critical designers will take that question into account when they do these sorts of things. The fun thing is that Eyebeam is when I started making exhibitions, the first place I wanted to go to was Eyebeam, because it was at the forefront of digital experimentation. Artists were in residency there, making great work that also had this difficulty and this time-consuming, but also high need of hardware that was still very expensive. Nowadays, it's a lot less expensive, but the time is still a thing in creating these kinds of stories. So the time poorness of the journalist is also the time poorness of the designer and the artist. But probably some of the answer in overcoming that is in what she also suggests is maybe not try and add more and more and more news and more detailed information and doing every little fact, but to make better and more complex and layered stories that will grab the essence of what is happening and the important processes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was also surprised by this project that she showed, that it was in collaboration with The New Yorker, which is like a fantastic but very traditional, classic news medium, and that they were willing to...
But this is an essay in visual. This is also storytelling in almost a film way.
Right.
It's also almost a classic way of doing or of illustrating, because it is still a little bit illustrative to a news story.
Yeah. Now we're talking about making these stories.
Yeah.
But there is also the audience. Do you think that people are ready for new forms of journalism?
I think they are, and more and more. I mean, people have to learn to appreciate that. And I think younger generations learn very fast. I think the digital born, I'm not digital born, but I can barely keep up. But there's a lot happening in how you consume these stories and how you read them and how you understand them. And I think it's interesting to see that in a lot of art academies, there are now courses and plans like non-linear narratives. It's a master here in The Hague. I think that's wonderful because we need non-linear narratives to be made by artists, to be maybe also experimented with in traditional news media.
Can you explain for people who don't know what it is? What is non-linear?
Well, a storyline usually goes from A to B to C to D. It's like a film. It's like understanding how something comes about. Non-linear would mean you have this part and this part, more like a collage. And it's changing the way you take the information to yourself. It probably also appeals to the way you link things within your head. So you have to be able to read that, to understand that. But we do that more and more. In film, it's also used more and more to jump from time zones, to have different characters, to experiment with places where you are or ways of filming, and making it a complex story so you don't really know where you are, but you know there's something happening. And there's these other things that you can use in conveying reality, because reality is much more complex than we usually give it.
Right.
We try to see it one-dimensional or two-dimensional at the most. And it's maybe 4 or 5 or 5,000 dimensions.
I will show some examples of how complex reality can be. That is, you chose 3 examples of what you think are outstanding projects. And the first one is by a Dutch artist called Coralie Vogelaar. Who is she and what was her project about?
Coralie is an Amsterdam-based artist who mainly works in the digital realm, technology, and she focuses a lot on the interaction between the machine, the software we use, the biases that are in there, the algorithmics that we trust and that we take for granted in a way and see as neutral, which they are not. And she kind of explores and experiments with that, and she takes it apart. She uses a lot of science. And
we have a still here, actually.
Yes. This is a very interesting project. This is, we've shown this at MU. It's called Recognized, Not Recognized. And for this, she has taken databases of photo press agencies. She scraped them for the 10 biggest news events between 2010 and 2015, I think. And she gathered about 850,000 pictures of these 10 events, made from all kinds of different angles, made by professional photojournalists, but also by citizen journalists or passers-by with a phone. And she combined them and ran through them and analyzed them on how people were acting in these. And her question was, what features determine a successful news photograph? And the successfulness she took from how much they were indexed on Google. So the one with the highest rates were taken a lot by newspapers and by people watching it, thinking that that was the best news picture of that event.
She kind of found the type of news picture?
Well, she never says, I found it.
Because,
but she was
rating it.
Yeah, she was looking at these different features and analyzing them. And then the interesting part is you could line them out and you could picture them. But then she asked a choreographer, a befriended choreographer, to play them out, to choreograph these different settings. So she selected like 20 or 30, and she selected the chosen ones, so the good ones, and the not so good ones, or the ones that didn't make it.
And they are in the same video.
And they were placed next to each other, and the dancers were doing these postures.
Taking these poses.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a video clip, I think. Let's just go to the next one, the next project you chose, because it's different.
Very different.
It's by Alice Wong, and it's a project called Us versus Them. Mm-hmm. Can you please introduce it?
Alice Wong is also a designer who graduated from the Design Academy. She calls herself a storyteller in film, and she makes a lot of mix-ups and collages. She uses a lot of humor and a lot of references from pop culture or ordinary media, and by recomposing them and mixing them up, a different kind of story appears, and it's very engaging.
What is this one about?
This one is called Us and Them, and it's it gives a voice to the Asian and Asian American people in the States, of course, how they came as working there, and how they were viewed, and also from the beginning they were put aside from, and they came to work, but very quickly there was this really heavy othering going on, putting them in their own. These Chinatowns are not because the Chinese really wanted to be together, but they were now, well, they were trying to get a safe place together. So they had to stay together just to keep, to be safe.
Okay.
And in pop culture, you have all kinds of references, and she uses a lot of pop culture for it.
Okay.
So when I have kids, they're going to be really weird looking, because they're going to be half Asian and half regular. And people are always like, you don't like Asian guys? I'm like, no, I like regular people.
What does this actually mean? When Chinese immigrants first showed up in the U.S. in the 1800s,
they moved into the old homes that white people had abandoned for greener pastures.
The basic desire was to make a living.
And making a living was easier said than done.
Chop, chop! Get these goodies back in here!
What? The backlash against Chinese was not motivated by a sense that they were inferior. It was the sense that they were superior, that they would do better than white, many of whom themselves also were foreigners.
Everybody knows that. I'm going to kill China. To hell with that damn China.
White America saw them as heathens who stole their jobs and raped their women.
The term was called yellow peril, where Asian men were seen as primitive, dangerous madmen.
Everything from political cartoons, obviously government policy, was all about kind of framing Asians as almost bestial vermin.
The xenophobia and discrimination escalated, leading Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which completely banned Chinese immigration to the U.S.
The Chinese Exclusion Act contributed to the creation of Chinatowns across the U.S., places where Chinese immigrants could feel safe.
The law wasn't overturned until 1943, when the United States needed China's cooperation fighting Japan in World War II.
It's clear what you said about pop culture.
Yes, very much. And I think it's wonderful how she uses these images that we all know and puts them together in a different way, tells this a very profound story with it, and a very painful story also. But it's going on again. It's happening now again. Because of Corona probably, and the way Trump has framed it to be the Chinese disease. Yeah. You get this all and over again, and you look differently at a kung fu film, and you look differently at a Chinese in a comic being depicted in a very typical way. Right. And I think that's important.
Okay. Let's move to your third choice. Yeah. It's a project by Cream on Chrome. Shall we first see it?
Yes,
or do you want to introduce? No, maybe you introduce what it is. Or
well, Cream on Chrome is a duo also. I know them from Eindhoven. They are very much interested in taking up very prominent societal changes and transformations, and making them into experiential installations that turn your view on issues around, but also open up a discussion.
Based on the research we did for 4D News, we created a newsroom with 2 interactive interfaces.
Visitors use a green arrow to browse the timeline of a news story. The aim is to add context by looking at the recent past to understand how we arrive at the present.
One story displays the changing perception of the city of Aleppo over the course of the Syrian conflict, as reported from Dutch news media.
The Syrian army stepped up its attacks on Aleppo and Homs yesterday.
Seeing these different times, like slices of subjective truths next to each other, users can debunk inconsistent coverage and question how Western news media is framing events.
There is still the smell of Arabian poetry.
On the other side of the room is an updating article, where visitors can pull a physical scroll bar up and down, browsing the timeline with changing headlines, images, and tones of voice. The story analyzes how Angela Merkel's phrase, "Wir schaffen das, we can do this," was radically reinterpreted by the media from 2015 to 18.
4D News is an experimentation into news formats, as well as a research method that explores the development of entire news stories.
Our project aims to turn news consumers into news explorers by revealing how the journalistic framing around media spectacles continues to change over time.
At the end of this short film, the male voice says something that I found interesting. They talk about moving from news consumers to news explorers. So it's a kind of meta story about journalism. Is that the importance of the kind of work they do?
Sort of, yeah. It's opening up the debate, but also giving agency to the person watching, or to who's consuming, to explore for themselves, to make their own stories, to make their own linkages within time. And I think that's something, when I chose these projects all 3 separately, because I like them a lot. And then one of the things also what Marisa was saying about time poorness, time consuming, they all have to do with time. So this is about telling a story not as it happens, which journalism often is. It takes the full length of a period and analyzing that, making it more like a circular story about it. Aleppo was alive, and it was a city that was bustling, and then the war came, and now it's all broken. And to see that happening in time, and to be able to see that happening gives another layer and more deeper meaning to it. And you can start thinking about, what do I think of that, in a way?
This ties in with a viewer's question by a viewer, or rather more a statement saying, okay, designers used to illustrate journalistic work. And what we're talking about actually is designers being journalists and journalists being designers more.
Well, it's a co-creation. I think each can bring expertise and knowledge and practice to the table, and together they create something new. And I think that's what is happening and what should happen, and what can also overcome this time-consumedness, because you need time to do a good story that has temporality, that has depth, that has knowledge. But if you do it with 5 or 10 people, or if you do it with, like old media were expensive too.
Right.
I mean, it's not cheap to make a television documentary. It's not cheap to make a newspaper every day. Does it need to be every day? Or can we do twice a week and then go in depth? I think the Correspondent is exactly doing that.
Right.
Without having the burden of advertising. I call it burden because it can also be a privilege, of course, to have the money from advertising, but it also makes you into a commercial medium that has to provide on and on and on.
Okay, so we had design, we had journalism, and now we have time. Angelique, thank you very much for showing us these works. We will make room now for our next guest. Saskia van Stijn is currently head of the Critical Inquiry Lab at the Design Academy Eindhoven. She focuses on the relationship between technological, political, economic, psychological, and cultural phenomena. Saskia, welcome.
Pleasure.
To start with, what is Critical Inquiry Lab? It sounds critical.
Well, let's aim that we can help find youngsters their criticality. And it was already mentioned in the previous conversation that design is expanding quite rapidly. There's an acknowledgement that design is very much rooted in a Western canon, in modernity, which comes with colonizing, which comes with preemptive gender roles. And what we teach our students is, in fact, to extend their judgment, to really delve into deep time, to hook onto the word time that you mentioned, because, of course, when we think about journalism, it has the word jour, day, and the acceleration of information was already mentioned. So I would say that one of the bigger challenges is to really stay with certain questions underpinning our environment, and I believe that a lot of that we live is in fact designed. We live in a designed environment, material and immaterial. That means we could alter the systems, the processes that we call our daily reality, our daily lives. And that's what I hope to educate.
When you say we live in a designed environment, but buildings are being designed, clothes are being designed, I understand. But are you also saying that our thoughts, our concepts are being designed?
Well, I mean, you're now touching straight away onto one of the, let's say, leading topics, what we would call subjective capitalism, where the self is indeed designed, either consciously or unconsciously. This pans out into many different philosophical streams, but maybe touching on, let's say, the idea of production, and how production gives a sense of existential rigor, or the idea of the quantified self, that we look at the self through optimization of the body or the mind. Notions of the cyborg, of course, have entered the discourse via Donna Haraway, where we optimize, well, how we see. So it's not only far away, but the idea of the techne, the technology, which was already emphasized earlier on, obviously plays an important role. And yes, that's, let's say, it questions a little bit notions of, yeah, let's say, truisms, for lack of a better word.
I see. We've seen some works passing already in what you are doing. Are you satisfied with the works you've seen, or because I remember you said somewhere that we really need to change the journalistic systems that we have grown accustomed to. Are the works that you've seen up till now, are they doing that, or is there more you have in mind? When does the revolution start?
Yesterday. No, I'm hoping that, well, I think if we look at the planetary system, and you don't have to be a huge theoretician to understand that the way we organize life at the moment is unjust, is going to cause a lot of problems, and the points on the horizon are there. We read it in the newspaper every day. I was quite struck that I was asked to speak about journalism. It was on invitation of Danielle Aretz. She's a tutor at one of the leading schools on journalism. And I was interested to think about, let's say, the true infiltration of technology into, let's say, the idea of how we absorb information on a day-to-day basis and how we understand, how legible are the codes. We are being confronted with information already from very early on. But it seemed to me that the amount of resistance to looking for civic values, for societal, I mentioned truisms already without being too narrow casting on that. If we see what happened now with the journalist of Belarus hijacked if we see what happened in Gaza with there's apparently quite some fear of the potential of proper information. What proper information could do is possibly, and here I'm going a bit in a wide stroke maybe, but shift our quite consumer and passive attitude to a more active and engaged attitude. And this also talks back to what you said earlier.
So are you saying we should, as citizens, be more aware of the power we have once we inform ourselves and once we use that information? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yeah. I would even say that it is our civic duty to try to understand why riots occur, or if there's a Black Lives Matter, what is truly going on there. Don't just look behind the surface, extend your judgment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now it seems like a bit of a moot question, but how can design play a role in this?
Well, in the extended version of design that I dare to embrace, I've come across so many talented, engaged, young, civic, active, but also poetic souls that in fact find something that really makes them tick, and they delve in very, very deep, and they visualize it, and they give us a portal to understand situations or to feel situations or to reconnect to others. So there's a vast amount of young and also older people globally trying to reenact what it means to be an active citizen, and what the role of design can play, in fact, to feel, I would nearly say, more human, to humanize us again.
I remember when we talked before you came here, we had a conversation over the phone, and you said that you were born in Iraq, and that somehow, or possibly, changed the way you look at Western media, journalism, etc. Could you go a bit into that? I mean, for how long did you live in Iraq?
Well, maybe just to rephrase it, my early years were spent in Dar es Salaam in East Africa, and after that we moved. And after that we moved to Iraq. I was not expecting to talk about myself on that sense, but what I can say is that quite recently I've come to understand how influential it has been for me to live among very different cultures and to bring that back home, and through the lens of the idea of the frame, intentionally or non-intentionally, people are being stereotyped. The work of Alice obviously points at that point. So we are being othered through the media to a certain extent. And again, there's people that benefit from these divisional practices. Right. And for me, that has been an incentive to delve deeper in the cultural potential of reconnecting us with others.
Okay. Like Angelique, you also asked us to select some works. I suggest we look at them and you might tell us what they are about. Let's start with Rachel Moron, maybe without introduction.
It is said that everything is the same. Everything looks the same, feels the same, acts the same, and enacts the same gestures. It is said that the most interesting content occurs when users repeat. Like learning to speak, you imitate those around you in order to become. Now, relations are made by the pressing of a few buttons. Control-C, Control-V, space and enter. There is no artistic, scientific or political activity which is not aimed at it. For there is a general desire to be endlessly remembered, and endlessly repeatable, and no everyday activity which does not aspire to be photographed, filmed, videotaped, or described. Their letters, phrases, and gestures are yours too.
Rachel Moron, what did we see?
We watched a very small snippet of a documentary she's worked on, and she has been investigating the idea of the template. Now, the template, of course, when the computer came about, was as a tool to design your own websites. I don't know if you... I think we're both old enough to remember. So this idea was rooted in the internet being a platform for disseminating larger and smaller stories. And through that, then later on, the template, in fact, let's say, in the discourse was cornered a little bit towards a derogative, and even the internet at large, I would say, has been stuck a little bit in the larger discussion that the big tech is dominating all its potentiality. So I jokingly have called this the Gutenberg press on steroids, because it shows us how, on the one hand, one aspect of this work is that she questions very much this idea of the burden of autonomy. Wouldn't it be much nicer to think about what do we have in common, because we learn through mirroring each other also. And obviously the second aspect is she looked at TikTok and all these more popular platforms to understand how we could use them and generate, let's say, an empowering tool out of them.
Okay. We just continue with, and we can start it, and you can talk because there is no sound. This is the work by the French artist Maxime Benvenuto, and these are stills of an exhibition he did in the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven.
Maxime is a designer, writer, researcher, and moderator. And here you see one of his installations, the Political Atlas of Alibaba, which was framed in a larger exhibition entitled Geodesign. That's part of the exhibition series that the Design Academy is engaged in, with Martina Muzzi as the curator. And they try to shed light on large systems. So Alibaba, of course, the supermarket online. In this case, he was struck by an image, this initial image he found in 2017, where the CEO of Alibaba, Jack Ma, visited the Greek Prime Minister. And that sort of got him analyzing and questioning how does a corporate person engage in national government politics and policies. And this is how he started to archive all the, let's say, relational encounters that Jack Ma has had, resulting in these 300 articles. He was a bit restricted by language, but he started to analyze and found out that these conversations were, of course, about making deals, but also about visas, about women enterprises, the internet as an infrastructure. He was, of course, the person, the postillon d'amour, to reflect on the 5G network. Well, nowadays I think people know what it's about, but it's like the second Silk Road. So, in a way, he just, by showing it towards an audience, wanted to sort of emphasize that question, should sovereignty not mean that governments speak to each other, or what does it mean when we cross-contaminate these worlds?
The last piece you picked is by an artist from Georgia, not the American state, but the country Georgia. The artist is Irakli Sabekia. I think this short film speaks for itself.
My name is Irakli Sabekia. For my graduation project, I'm addressing a big problem in Georgia. A big part of the country is occupied by Russia since 2008. In this occupied land, villages are being burned down and completely erased in an attempt to rewrite history. My project subverts the very weapon of occupation, which is the razor wire fence, into a tool of voicing a protest against itself. By connecting to it, my radio transmitter uses it as an antenna, and through this antenna broadcasts the names and the coordinates of the disappeared villages. So my intention in this project was to demonstrate an active approach rather than staying a passive observer, because this is very important for the whole community, but it's also important for me personally because it's part of my story.
What is the importance of these kind of works?
Well, to me, I find it's a very poetic work. Also within the graduation show, a lot of people resonated with it because it had a certain softness, and with your own shade, you would in fact see the villages of people that had disappeared. And in order to visualize how histories are being rewritten or how people are being muted, are not given a voice, is in fact something extremely important, I would say, to I think Simone mentioned the idea of democracy. Well, if we don't even have a voice anymore to speak, and he visualizes that in a very beautiful way. And the second aspect I wanted to point out is that he introduces the radio, and I see a lot of young designers embracing radio. We talk about all different technologies. We haven't truly mentioned radio. I'm a big fan, but that's beside the point. This quite light medium obviously also decentralizes, light in the sense of financial means, but enables let's say, a platform for voices that are otherwise unheard. And it is interesting that the younger generation is embracing radio again as a medium.
And podcasts, of course.
Of course.
Now, to conclude with you, Saskia, we both share an interest and admiration for the research agency Forensic Architecture. It has been mentioned already several times. Let's first watch the interview I pre-recorded with one of the people working for Forensic Architecture, Bob Trafford. And I would like to point out that he introduces himself briefly and then explains how they tried to solve a murder in Turkey.
So Forensic Architecture is a number of things. As you've outlined, we're a research agency based here at the University of London, where we conduct human rights investigations with and on behalf of communities affected by state violence, corporate violence, environmental racism, colonial legacies. We're really an organization that wants to put innovative technical skill of the kinds that you've just started to outline in the service of communities and individuals who are struggling against oppressive and repressive violence.
What kind of research methods do you use?
Forensic architecture is a child of the open source revolution in many ways. So the information and communication revolution that happened around 2008, 2009, when social media and the mass availability of smartphones and cloud storage changed the way that we all began to communicate. And at the same time, huge geopolitical events like the Arab Spring, subsequently the Syrian civil war, changed the way that we understood conflict reporting, for example.
Could you briefly give some examples of some recent projects you worked on or projects you're proud of?
Let's talk about the killing of Taha Elchi. This is a case that you and I talked about before, right?
On the 28th of November 2015, just before 11 a.m., Taha Elchi, a prominent Kurdish human rights lawyer, was fatally shot while giving a press conference. In 2016, the Diyarbakir Bar Association asked Forensic Architecture to conduct a technical investigation using the evidence passed to them by the public prosecutor. We examined visual, spatial, and acoustic material to determine who could be considered a suspect. The incident was captured by 4 cameras. Videos 1, 3, and 4 were filmed by journalists covering the press conference. One video, from camera 2, was recorded by a policeman tasked with gathering intelligence. We synchronized the 4 cameras by identifying the same distinct sound patterns in each video and aligning them to one another. We adjusted and verified the synchronization with the help of visual details such as this cat, and by matching the movements of people's legs. The synchronized footage allowed us to view particular moments during the scene from different perspectives. When the incident began, the cameramen turned their cameras away from Elchi and towards the 2 PKK militants. Crucially, despite being just a few meters away from Elchi, none of them visually captured the precise moment that he was shot. As the killing took place off-camera, we needed to reconstruct that part of the scene by other means. First, we narrowed the time period in which the fatal shot could have taken place by examining the videos frame by frame. Every second of footage in our investigation is made up of 25 frames. We found the last frame in which Elchi is seen standing to mark the beginning of the time period. We then found the first frame in which Elchi can be seen lying on the ground to mark the end of the time period of our investigation. We narrowed the time period further by identifying the sound of the last gunshot within it. The time period of our analysis was thus reduced to 9 seconds and 10 frames. We built a precise model of the site using architectural plans and elevations of Yenikapı Street produced by the Diyarbakir Chamber of Architects, as well as satellite images of the area. We located and oriented the 4 cameras within our model. This allowed us to establish the location of each of the actors. 5 of the policemen seen shooting, labelled A, B, C, D, and E, the PKK militants referred to as Runner 1 and Runner 2, and Elchi, in the last position he was seen alive. Using camera mapping, we were also able to locate the movements of these actors. The movement of the cameramen, of policeman B, of the 2 armed runners as they run past the scene, and of policeman A, and policemen C, D, and E, who fired at the runners throughout. An armoured vehicle arrived at the scene 12 minutes after the incident. Vehicle parked directly next to Elchi's body. From this photograph, we established the precise position of Elchi's body after he was shot. Using this position as a starting point, we set out to estimate where Elchi could have been when he was shot. According to the official autopsy report, Elchi was hit by a single bullet, which entered through the lower left side of his skull and exited just above his left eyebrow. According to Dr. Umit Picher, an independent forensic pathologist, wounds and scratch marks on Elchi's face and hands suggest that he did not try to resist the fall. Therefore, the bullet must have killed him or rendered him unconscious instantly. The direction of the scratch marks and the position of the body on the ground indicate that Elchi was shot from up Jennekappe Street in this direction. Dr. Bidcher suggests that when he was struck, Elchi could have been standing up to 1 meter back from the position of his body on the ground. Using this range, we reviewed the footage again to further narrow the time period in which Elchi could have been killed. Camera 2 is the first to turn towards the columns of the minaret. It captures a space between two of the columns from 7 seconds and 12 frames to the end of the time period at 9 seconds and 10 frames. Had Elchi been struck while camera 2 was pointed in this direction, we would have been able to see his body moving or falling between the two columns. Therefore, he must have fallen to the ground before this footage was captured. To corroborate this assessment, we reconstructed the motion and orientation of this camera in our 3D model, while also simulating Elchi's possible location. The simulation confirms that if Elchi had passed by the two columns during this time, he would have been filmed by camera 2. This further reduced the time period of the investigation to 7 seconds and 12 frames, and ruled out 10 of the 40 gunshots.
You know, what we see in that case is not only a really remarkable story, a really remarkable case to begin with, but also a very clear example of the possibility for civil society open source investigative work to not only prompt a state's judicial system, but to improve the quality of that judicial process, to feed into that work and to enhance the pursuit of accountability in that case.
The whole reconstruction done by forensic architecture, you can see either on our website, designalism.nl, or on YouTube. I think the whole reconstruction is in about 22-25 minutes, and it is stunning. And the results of the reconstruction are being used in the court case that is running now in Turkey. Saskia, is this, these are architects trying to solve a murder? Is this where journalism should be heading for?
Well, I would say there are multiple ways where we could head for, but I mean, time and resources have been mentioned quite a bit. And if I would have to answer, I will totally mention the opposite of their, let's say, jurisdictional approach, because we've already mentioned that I'm a deep admirer of their work. I would say maybe journalism could go really towards situated knowledge and not talk about people, but with people. That would be, I think, a great way forward.
Okay, thank you, Saskia. We're about to round off, so I'm going to invite back my first guest, Simone Weimans. And I would say, Simone, what did you learn tonight?
What did I learn tonight? Now, first of all, I was really inspired by a number of projects. I saw, for instance, Coralie Vogelaar, the analysis of news photos. I thought that was a really riveting way of showing these iconic news photos in choreography and telling
you
stories.
Even recognize the poses, right?
They're very iconic poses that we see on the news almost every day. And also the Re-Educated project with Marisa, Katz, visualization of news stories in animation. It has been done before. I remember a movie, Iranian movie, was also animated about a girl fleeing Iran with her family. It reminded me of that, this story.
I can't come up with the name. I know which one you mean. It's in black and white.
Yes, yes. I think that's a little bit similar. And I definitely saw aspects of of projects that we could use on the news as well. I mean, we're not going to do a choreography. I don't think my chief editor will like it if we certainly break out and dance and show the news in that way. But I think it's very interesting, certain project we could definitely incorporate in how we tell our stories on the news. And
I also noticed that some of the projects are some kind of meta projects in that they are sort of analyzing journalism.
Yes.
So instead of using it in a news program, it could be something to reflect upon what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and also reflecting upon how the techniques we use to tell our stories. For instance, this timeline, I thought was really interesting also. And also, you know, for us, some the ways we work are we've been doing it for 50 years, and it's very interesting to see other people reflecting on what we do, and we can use those reflections to change the way we work. But also, I also wanted to say that traditional ways of telling the news are, I don't think they will leave us. They will be very important still.
But that would be
yeah. But I sometimes feel that people look down upon traditional news media or the news anchor, or. But I feel that those forms of storytelling will always stay with us. That they have proven their importance and the fact that they have a lot of impact on our audience. So that won't change. And I also think when it comes to day-to-day news making, if a bomb goes off in Parliament, there's a pretty traditional way that we will cover that, and that people will watch this news unfold in a relatively traditional way. But maybe in 2 weeks' time, you can do an analysis, or you can visualize it in a different way. And I think that those aspects we can definitely incorporate in what we do. Yeah.
I will show the viewers and you two last pieces to round off with. The first piece is about theater. Stein mentioned it already when we started. It's a piece by Teatro di Nascosto, the Hidden Theater. It's a theater group, theater concept thought up by Annette Henneman, a Dutch artist. She's based in Volterra in Italy. And the work we're going to watch is a brief episode from a project called The Catwalk, in which 23 actors from Iraq, Kurdistan, Palestine, and Syria tell the news headlines. There is music, and on music they tell their personal stories from life with love, pain, loss, dreams, memories, and hope. And before we're going to watch it, I would like to say that Annette Henneman is somebody who travels to these places. She goes to Basra in Iraq. She goes to the occupied Palestinian territories to talk to people. She is with her feet on the ground, and that's where she gets her stories. She listens to people, to their stories. And with a lot of people that she meets, she makes, produces the pieces that she makes. Here is The Catwalk.
هددكن الإشاعات فاجأتنا يا غربي لما ودعت اليأس لفحتكن ريح الشمس ورجعت إيديكن تبني وتعمر صوت عياتكن خزق سماهن فرح معاولكن بالأرض بشرهن بهدم براج حبوا يردوكن عاليأس
عم بيقولوا بدن يعتقلوا ناس كتير
لا تخافوا ما في حبوسة ساعة كل الناس بيعتقلوا كتير بيبقى كتير وباللي بيبقوا رح منكمل غمرت طوفان الأرض ورجعوها اللي بقيوا هدمت لحروب المدن
Now, this was, of course, a short clip with everything put together. We didn't hear the people telling their stories, but this is literally personalizing the news.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's really. I think it's a really beautiful way of, and also maybe a way of dealing with trauma, because you can see. I think it's also about war and dealing with war, and those stories will be told probably in this play as well. So going to people themselves and reflecting on their stories, I think that's. I mean, I don't think we will use it in our form, but I think it's a very attractive way of telling stories as well. Yeah, it's just the first time I've seen it.
Hugging, people
yes,
hugging
you can see the impact
yeah.
it has on people's lives.
Yeah.
So,
this is a way, Teatro di Nascosto, it's a way to divulge the news and to divulge stories. Our last example of tonight, and then we'll round off. So stay with us for, let's say, 5 more minutes or so. Our last example is something that I think is a brilliant piece. It's a project by Reporters Without Borders, and it's called The Uncensored Library. And the Uncensored Library is meant to avoid censorship. A lot of we are talking about the free press. We still have the possibility to get the news, but there are a lot of countries where there is no way to get real trustworthy news. What Reporters Without Borders did, they used the very popular game Minecraft, and in the surroundings of Minecraft, they build a library.
Censorship, blockages, internet surveillance, and incredibly restrictive laws.
Orta Doğu'da basın özgürlüğü hiç bu kadar kötü olmamıştı.
I'm Yulia Berezovskaya. I run Granny.ru, which is blocked in Russia.
My name is Nguyen Van Dai. I am a news blogger from Vietnam. I was sentenced 15 years in prison.
Benim adım Hatice Cengiz. Cemal Kaşıkçı'nın nişanlısıyım.
Freedom of speech is important because we need to inform young people about the real political situation around the world.
The Uncensored Library is a bold use of Minecraft. It really encapsulates everything that's great about this game and the community that it's created.
As I look at this gorgeous Uncensored Library, I feel like this is what we should be doing.
Dünyadaki bütün insanların özgürce bilgiye ulaşmasını istiyorum.
The only real way of fighting censorship is sharing and spreading what is being censored.
Simone, the Uncensored Library.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. We started the talk with talking about press freedom and to fight for freedom. And of course, you have all these different projects where people are telling stories, but in these countries, they really can't tell the stories they really want. And this project, to me, yeah, it's almost brings tears to your eyes. It's such an original way of fighting for press freedom. And yeah, I think we should all embrace projects like this, definitely, for sure.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, our viewers. I hope you have some insight, some idea about what designalism is and how broad the field is and what is possible with it and what you can do probably also yourself with it. There are many more examples that you will find on our website, designalism.nl. There is also a series of podcasts. I think there are in about 20 now, or in August they will all be released. There are in about 25 podcasts I did with a range of artists. So if you're interested, listen to it. Thank you very much and have a great evening.